I'm Andy Agatangelo. I'm very proud to be the founder of a campaign group called the Transparency Task Force. We're a UK-based certified social enterprise. We reach about 5,000 people on a weekly basis through our newsletter called the Transparency Times. Of the 5,000, approximately 1,000 are in one of 20 countries outside the UK. And we've got lots and lots of people in Ireland who I'm very pleased to say pay attention to what we do from time to time. And we're becoming increasingly actively engaged with things in Ireland over the last year and a half or so. As you all know, this particular session is a conversation between myself and the Irish film producer director, Terry McMahon, a gentleman I've had the pleasure of knowing for roughly 2 weeks. But I can honestly tell you, this is a person, a human being, who I find to be incredibly interesting to listen to. There's so much of his work you can access online. Just do a Google search and you'll come up with all kinds of things, from films to podcasts to interviews. And there's something about Terry that makes him really, really easy and interesting to listen to. That's been my experience anyway. And I really do hope that you are able to access some of Terry's work after today's conversation. Whilst Terry, of course, is a remarkably well-known film producer and director, the thrust of today's conversation, of course, is going to be about why myself and many others, including Terry, are going to be in Dublin on the 18th of September. We're going to be marching. We're going to be marching from the forecourts to the Dublin Castle, to the Bank of Ireland on College Green, and then to Leinster House. And the march is an important march. It's our third Transparency Task Force march. The march is entitled the March for Justice. And even though both the UK and Ireland, of course, are parliamentary democracies with very well-established judicial systems that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, the simple, harsh reality, folks, is that the judicial system in neither of our countries is working as it should. It means that there are many people, literally thousands of people, including some on this session tonight, who are being stopped, actively stopped, from accessing the justice that they deserve. The situation that led them to need to access justice might have been through something like an unlawful repossession or a dodgy investment scandal, or some kind of financial crime or crookery. But the recurring theme is that the institutions, the regulators, the political bodies, the agencies that are supposed to be there to facilitate access to justice just does not seem to be working. That's why we're marching in Dublin on the 18th of September. That's why we're doing all we can to get the word out there that if it's at all possible, please be part of that community in Dublin on that day. Of course, we've got some Brits coming over, which is great. But of course, we're expecting most of the folk to be participating to be Irish citizens. My wife is half Irish. I've always had a soft spot for Ireland. I love Ireland. There's so much to love about Ireland and frankly, the Irish people. It's impossible to not have a lovely time when you go to Ireland because of the way the people are. There's just something about them that makes them, to me at least, very easy to approach, very easy to talk to, very easy to feel comfortable with. And one of the really nice things about the people that we've been getting to know in Ireland is their willingness to support and share and help the cause. And before we speak to Terry, I just want to make direct reference to Mr. Brian Riley, who's here with us tonight. Brian is an incredibly well-connected man in Dublin. Brian is somebody who, as you'll probably hear later, if you want to talk about it, is the kind of person who will stand up rather than stand by, not just in relation to his own situation, where he is most certainly the victim of the kind of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, and mis-selling that so many of you are victims of. But he's also got this wonderful willingness to share and to think about bringing people together. Brian's the kind of person that you find it easy to make 1 and 1 add up to 3 with, because of that willingness to share. And these comments, Brian, are very, very sincere. You're having a remarkably positive impact on me and my life. You're opening me up to all kinds of ideas and possibilities. You're creative, you're motivated, you're driven, you're purposeful. You have the kind of leadership qualities that make it really easy for people like me to want to, spend time, effort, energy, money running a march in Dublin. And thank you, Brian, for being the way that you are. And in particular, of course, thank you for making the wonderful connection that you've made to us, for connecting us with Terry. Folks, we're going to start off with a little bit of a theme here, almost a game, if you like. I'm going to put in the chat. I'm going to put in the chat the beginnings to the words of a very, very famous song. Okay, a very, very famous song. It's the last parts of a very famous and pretty long song. And by the way, folks, if you've heard me talk about this, then please don't kind of jump too quickly to it, because it will spoil it for everybody else. That's code for please don't ruin my joke. That's the first word in the last part of the song. Does anybody recognize the song yet? Probably not from that anyway. I'll quickly find the next part of it. The next part of it is this. This is my terrible attempt to be creative, folks. Does anybody recognize the song yet? Again, I'm guessing probably not. You may well get it from this line then. I'm sure some of you are going to get it from this line. As soon as you think you know the song, feel free to tap the song into the chat. I'm sure at least one person's going to find it. Nothing really matters. Anyone can sing.
Freddie Mercury.
There we go.
Everybody hurts. REM.
It's not Tony.
Freddie Mercury.
It's not. It is Bohemian Rhapsody. My goodness me, it exploded with noise there. It is Bohemian Rhapsody. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, folks. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, you might be wondering, what on earth is Andy Agafangelo talking about a Bohemian Rhapsody song? Well, let me tell you. Songs are wonderful things. Songs can kind of open up your mind to all sorts of thoughts and ideas and experiences that you can live through in a kind of vicarious way. But there's something about that particular song, and particularly the last few sentences at the end of the song. I'll put the whole of the last thing in the chat. You'll all know it, and I won't cause you pain by attempting to sing it. But I find that song and those last few words remarkably, profoundly poignant, because I've got no idea. I've got absolutely no idea what Freddie Mercury was thinking when he wrote that. I'm no mind reader. He could have been somewhere completely different to where I'm going to take you folk in just a moment. But I think maybe when Freddie Mercury wrote "Nothing Really Matters, Anyone Can See, Nothing Really Matters to Me," it's a provocation. It's a deliberate provocation. I think he's asking the listener, what matters to you? What really matters to you? And some of you will already know, because you've heard me mention this before. I've mentioned it so many times because it's had such a profound effect on me. Last year, I found myself flying back from Scotland after the funeral of one of our volunteers, a gentleman by the name of Ian Davis. And Ian Davis took his own life. And Ian Davis took his own life because he became the victim of a massive investment scandal. Ian hanged himself. We knew Ian pretty well. He was literally one of our volunteers, and we had been engaging with him about his case. Ian was a lawn mower repairman living in a beautiful, quaint, lovely, peaceful, small, tranquil village in rural Scotland. A really lovely gentleman, a really lovely man. And we know because he told us, and he is on video, we recorded this with him. After Ian lost about £600,000 to what became known as a catastrophic regulatory failure, Ian spent 3 years spending a huge amount of his time and effort trying to piece together the little jigsaw puzzle to try to identify who the criminals were behind this scam, this catastrophic regulatory failure. It's a pretty famous case now, the London Capital and Finance case. And what that early day motion, which is simply a statement made in Parliament, says is that it urges the authorities to do a better and more joined up job in protecting people from harm. And that is what the authorities are there for. We have authorities, some of them with enormous budgets, are paid to regulate and police the system and to keep people safe. And I connect what I've just said about Ian to Freddie Mercury's words, because when I think, to me, what really, really matters to me, it's the kind of things that I think probably really matter to you as well. Family, friends, truth, integrity, purposefulness, love, wisdom. We'd all have our own unique list. I encourage you to challenge yourselves to think about what really, really matters to you. And when you've done that, it might help you have the same benefit from doing it as I get. It gives me a chance to think about what doesn't really matter to me and to pay less attention to it. Material things don't really matter to me. They used to a hell of a lot, they just don't anymore. But when you go to the funeral of a lovely person who's hanged himself because of a catastrophic regulatory failure, it kind of focuses your mind. And you also get tuned into a particular kind of vibe that particular people put out there, subconsciously, unknowingly. And you just sense from them that they have a purpose. They have some kind of reason for doing what they do. And they have some kind of reason for being the way that they are. And to my mind, folks, it's oh so obvious. If you spend any time getting to know a little bit about Terry McMahon, you will most definitely come to the conclusion that he's somebody who has a remarkably authentic sense of purpose. I'm going to move on to talk about a very famous quotation that I find myself frequently referring to. It's a Robert F. Kennedy quotation. I'll just share it on the screen now, because I'm going to link what's on this quotation to Terry, and I'm going to invite Terry to talk about what he has spoken out about and what the consequences have been to him speaking out. And I'm pretty sure that when you hear Terry's response to these questions, you'll immediately understand the kind of person that he is, which is why, please, please, please understand why I feel so fortunate that things have happened such that we know Terry, and we've got the opportunity for Terry to know a little bit about us and what we are all trying to do. Again, I'm just going to share on the screen very, very quickly. Here's the quotation. You may well have seen, we've talked about this before. The quotation is, and it's from a time, by the way, folks, it's from a time in the late 60s when I think there was something pretty special going on in the world. There was a sense of optimism and hope, and there was a sense of we can do better as a society. I'm not talking about just the USA, I'm talking internationally here. There really was a very, very healthy vibe that seems to have gone. It's really quite depressing to think back, but that's how I feel about it. But anyway, Robert F. Kennedy said, "Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt, because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. And that, folks, I think is a very, very powerful, very powerful set of words that we can all derive a great deal from on many, many occasions. So with all that in mind, having talked about focusing on what really matters to us, what really, really matters to us, and talking about speaking out and the consequences of speaking out, Mr. Terry McMahon, thank you so much for being our guest this evening. We're very grateful to you for being here. In a moment, I'd love you to talk about what you've spoken out about in the past and what the consequences have been to you. But before we do that, can I please invite everyone here today to just share and join in with me in sharing, showing your appreciation for Terry being with us tonight and giving us his thoughts. Thank you very much indeed, folks. Thank you. Mr. Terry McMahon, please do dive straight into telling us whatever you like to about what you've spoken out about in the past and what the consequences have been. And there's no rush. Let's have a very, very open conversation with each other and see where the conversation takes us. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. The first thing is the grandiosity of what you've described as this being this evening. When I read it, I felt embarrassed, self-conscious. There's extraordinary people in this group who've gone through incredible things that most of us can't even imagine, and yet they've experienced it in reality. So I'll pull everything back from what you've said and start from a very humble appreciation of the people in the room, a very humble appreciation of your organization, what you're doing, what you're trying to do. But then I'll quickly move on from that humility and talk about things that matter and words that matter. You're quoting Kennedy. Words have changed so much and been bastardized so much and being weaponized so much that even words like transparency, we no longer know what they mean. And once you bastardize language, you police thought, you police personal thought, you police collective thought. And when I hear words like those quotes, love, you mentioned the word love and how much that matters. I think increasingly we don't know what words mean anymore. And one of the things that I'm painfully aware of, because words is my business, the use of language and the power of language to stimulate and provoke an audience into having a cathartic response. The function of dramatic construct is to create a piece of fiction that transcends the limitations of reality, allows an audience to pause their own reality, suspend disbelief, and engage in a narrative construct, the consequence of which creates in them a cathartic release. So on a simple level, they will watch a film about jealousy and infidelity, and they will see the pleasure of infidelity, the excitement, and then the consequence of it. And what it does is it gives them an indication of what they're capable of having pleasure from, but then they see the moral consequence. So it teaches them and they learn from it without having to take action themselves. And that dramatic structure comes from all the way back to Aristotle. But now that dramatic construct has been used in a weaponized way. I think a lot of the psychoanalysis that has been done has been weaponized in a way that we can't even begin to imagine yet. And when we hear words like matter, obviously the biggest one would be Black Lives Matter and the divisive nature of Black Lives Matter. Despite the realities became utterly irrelevant to a larger ideology. And that larger ideology, like most ideas that were initially noble, end up being completely weaponized. So Black lives don't matter when it comes to poverty. Black lives don't matter when it comes to women having to work 3 jobs to feed their kids. Black lives don't matter when it comes to the highest rates of abortion in the American society. Black lives don't matter when it comes to any of those things. But Black lives matter when it comes to some upper class white politician in Ireland exploiting it and manipulating it, some white upper class politician in England exploiting it and manipulating it and creating further divisions between people who never even saw race. And now we're indoctrinated every day, not just to see race, but to placate any idea we might have of differences, of the nobility of difference, the beauty of difference, the celebratory elements of being individual characters. We've destroyed all of those things. So I think, and I'll try and keep brief, but for me, my biggest fear is that language is losing all meaning. And my son, my eldest son, when I was involved in one form of activism and the government betrayed us and we were horrified at this public betrayal, his young response was, how stupid are you to have trusted them in the first place? And that's terrifying, that we now have a generation behind us who just simply accept the reality that these psychotic, fraudulent, dangerous liars are going to be that all the time. And the best thing to do is to lose yourself in small independent groups or even small independent social media groups and to negate reality. And now I think we're in a situation where, again, that grandiose introduction, but why all of us should be marching on the 18th is because we had this conversation the other day, because it's only a matter of time before you're next. It's only a matter of time before somebody is going to manipulate language, manipulate meaning, manipulate what matters, and turn it into a weaponized way to discredit you, to cancel you, or maybe even destroy you. And we're watching this happen all around us. So that long list you made, which is a beautiful list, I don't know what most of those words mean anymore, because every day we're being told that their meaning is the opposite. Sorry for sounding so cynical on the outset, but that rage that comes from that hopelessness that comes from that, and that desire to confront the absolute relentless fallacy of our day-to-day existence, despite the fact that it might feel like you're a eunuch in a whorehouse.
Sorry, thank you very much indeed. So your experiences have obviously caused you to be the way that you are. My experiences have caused me to be the way that I am. It's the same for everybody. Can you tell us about what it is that has opened your eyes up, so to speak, to see things the way that you see them? What have been your life experiences? If you can give us a few pointers as to the kind of things that you've seen or experienced that lead you to this sense of it's more than frustration, this sense of perhaps even anger about the way that things are, and a real determination to do what you can about it. What's been your experiences, Terry?
Well, apart from the anecdotal ones, which there's no point in going into in any great detail, but I was part of the group in Ireland who took over a 13-story building to house the homeless at Christmas. And we were part of a small group of artists who were teaching young men, disenfranchised young men. We were their mentors, supposedly. And it was coming up to the centenary of 1916, when Ireland secured from a bunch of men and a bunch of women who were artists and poets and courageous beyond belief, who were destroyed in real time and then subsequently romanticized, perhaps unfairly, perhaps nobly, perhaps appropriately. But 100 years later, we were living in a time where not only were the poor and the disenfranchised and the vulnerable rejected from society, they were replaced by ideologically suitable candidates for a new form of division, a new form of vulnerability. But this vulnerability was nothing to do with reality. And when I saw that happening, we were part of that group, and I realized we can't be mentors to these young men if we ourselves are cowards. So my idea was to take over the GPO. The GPO is the General Post Office in Dublin, which is, in terms of the iconography of that revolution, it was where it all happened. And we talked about it. We had a series of meetings. The great artist, Damien Dempsey, the singer, John Connors, the actor and writer and director, Dean Scully, an activist from Ballymun. And the four of us were trying to find a series of discussions with Ireland's major artists to find out what was the best way to approach this. And in the room, it was incredible to see how fast the terror took over when there was any talk of any kind of aberrant behavior or any deviation from the law. And the idea of taking over the GPO was abhorrent to so many of them. Some of them get up and left the room immediately. But the four people who stayed were Dean, Damien Dempsey, and John Connors, and they said, we got to do this. Then I realized that if we took over the GPO, the problem was that we could end up hurting some of the security. And that was never allowed to be on the table, because those security are just working class men and women, the same as ourselves. Those staff are working class men and women, the same as ourselves. And we also realized that we couldn't house the homeless there. We'd found a way to cordon off O'Connell Street. That whole section was very easy to cordon off with a few buses and everything. But the plan became too grandiose, to use that word again, and too potentially dangerous for innocent people. And then Dean Scurry got back, and he had an extraordinary idea of taking this building, this empty building. And we took that building. It was an incredible thing. And I was asked to write a speech for Jim Sheridan, the great filmmaker Jim Sheridan. And Jim read the speech and he said, "You should do it." And I reluctantly did the speech. And the speech ended up becoming something that, again, the idea was, we said from the outset, this needs to get onto the front of the New York Times, because the only thing the Irish government is afraid of is outside perception. They don't give a damn about how people in this country see them, because they're only auditioning for jobs later down the line anyway. And we ended up getting on the front of the New York Times, even though it was just the digital New York Times. But we discovered that it shook the government to the core, but perhaps more importantly, it inspired the nation. And there was an outpouring of kindness, generosity of spirit, courage that I hadn't experienced perhaps in my entire life. And everybody wanted to help. Everybody wanted to be part of something beautiful, not an ideology, but something beautiful, a grassroots movement. And the government, again, an indication of our insecurity and our naivety, the government arranged a meeting. And we had a meeting with Simon Coveney. And Simon Coveney was a major player in the government. And he also was somebody who attended the Bilderberg meetings, all those kind of things. Do a basic search on him, you'll find out who he is. And in our naivety, we sat down with him. There was, Glenn Hansard was the other, the fourth person, or the fifth person. Glenn Hansard was amazing, the singer-songwriter. And we had a meeting with them. There were some union people there. There were some artists there. And I was watching Coveney. Now, I'd had an experience not too earlier where a guy who lived 3 doors up from me, during ugly times, it was during lockdown, and he passed by my children and he spat on the ground. And we didn't know at the time what COVID was or how it was going to be transmissible or anything, but he spat on the ground in front of my children. And I knew he'd been to jail. I knew he had a bad history. And I confronted him. And he looked at me. And I vividly remember how he looked at me. And there was a coldness. I've worked with the so-called mentally, the word we used at the time was mentally handicapped. I don't know what the PR term is now. But I worked with them and I found them to be extraordinary people. But I'd seen something in him that I'd never seen before, except one time before. And I remembered it. And a short time later, this guy looked at me and he says, "If you were going to do something, you would have done it already." And that was his line. And I remember how clearly powerful that line was. And then a few short months later, his brother had become so frightened of him, he wore a camera attached to, a body cam attached to him, recording at all times. And his brother recorded his own murder. This guy pummeled his brother to death, murdered him 3 doors up from us. Now, the look in his eye that I had seen, I said it to my missus at the time. I says, "I've only seen that look in somebody's eye one time before. That level of psychotic coldness." And it was Simon Coveney sitting in that negotiation room discussing the future of the homeless. Now, he promised that he would have children out of temporary accommodation within a 6-month period. He guaranteed this. And that was the major negotiation point in the whole process. And the second one was I wanted own key accommodation. I had been homeless. I knew what it was like to dream of having a bedsit. I had a bedsit when I was 15. I was homeless when I was 15 and I got my first bedsit. And the feeling of putting that key in that door and turning that key for the first time and closing that door behind you and getting into a bed where nobody was going to kick you, nobody was going to do anything to you, the weather wasn't going to rain on you or snow on you. It was an amazing experience. I felt like a king. And those were the two major negotiating points. And he promised to deliver on those. And within the shortest time frame, he left his position, was promoted to a more powerful position, and those children in that accommodation were completely forgotten. And now the level of homelessness in this country since that occupation has increased. I think it's 87%. So when we talk about when are those moments or when are those times, we all have moments in our life where we start to realize that our reality and our ethics and our naivety and our honesty are nothing more than tools of stupidity to be exploited by these people. But in that instance, it was, for me, a very verifiable case that not only are these psychopaths capable of extraordinary, grandiose lies, they get pleasure from it. And the pleasure is I don't know what, I'm not going to try and psychoanalyze them, but they're not just getting pleasure from it, but they're getting rewarded from it. And I see that everywhere now. Fraudulent liars being rewarded, truth seekers being punished, and the fact that we don't even know anymore what is what and who is something that benefits them immeasurably and does terrible damage to us.
Terry, this is so interesting. When you think about the future, do you see something happening where the pendulum might start swinging back in the right way? Do you feel bleak about the future in that regard, or is there something coming over the horizon that's going to save us, or am I just being naive?
No, but even when I hear words like pendulum, the thing is that, they say the only thing that history teaches us is that history teaches us nothing. But when there were major social movements in the past, they were people led. Now major social movements are ideologically led, and they are created on TikTok, and they're created on Instagram, and they're created on Facebook, and there's this sweep of self-righteousness, sweep of activism that bears no relation to anybody's reality. So again, and I give the example, the only reason I mentioned Black Lives Matter is because in that instance, you're talking about one terrible, tragic death. I'm not suggesting for a moment it was anything other than that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the fact that that was used to create civil war in America is horrific beyond belief. I think there's 27 people were murdered directly as a consequence of it. And these people were described as heroes. But during lockdown in Ireland, we stuck elderly people behind plastic glass and wouldn't allow them to touch their grandchildren or their children, wouldn't allow them to touch each other. We took them out of hospitals and put them in old folks' homes. In the hospitals, they were being given treatment and being protected. In the old folks' homes, they were given nothing. And we had this incredible, arrogant belief that somehow we were all in this together. And our belief in that, our insistence that that was true, despite the fact that the people who were telling this were bona fide liars, verifiable psychopathic liars, gave me a level of heartbreak that is impossible to describe. Because that pendulum you talk about, that was our time. That was our opportunity on a small level to go, this is wrong. This is ethically wrong. And the fact that we were willing to rob our children of their education, the fact that we were willing to shop our neighbors, turn on each other, turn on our family members, turn on friends, the fact that we were so easily manipulated into becoming aggressively ugly in our behavior and our thought processes. And then after the fact, now that we can retrospectively look back, people not only don't feel any remorse, they've doubled down on it. So when we talk about pendulums, I think there might be an extraordinary, noble group of people out there, but there's too many. Yes, love, give me a second.
About 5 minutes.
Okay. This is my daughter here, everybody, my two daughters. They're going to see Beetlejuice tonight. All right, girls, I'll be out in a second.
They're ready. Let's go.
Lovely.
These are the pendulum. These give me hope.
You have
right.
5 minutes.
Enjoy Beetlejuice, girls.
You have 5 minutes until we have to spray your hair.
Okay. Sorry if that sounds cynical, but it's that.
No, it's real. I'll tell you, talking about cynical. One of the big things we've been talking about in the UK this year has been the documentary Alan Bates versus the Post Office. So you've seen it, I guess, yeah? You've seen it? Okay. Yeah. And for many of us, even folks like me who spend a lot of time campaigning and thinking about what's wrong that needs to be put right and the amount of dishonesty in the system, for many of us, that documentary has taken us somewhere new, even further in our sad realization that there's frankly a lot of corruption in the system. And I almost feel stupid, frankly, feeling myself now to be rather naive about just how much some people will seem to do to protect their interests at the expense of others. Can you imagine being able to sleep at night knowing that you've allowed false testimony to be given in a court that's resulted in a pregnant lady going into jail? You know, it's just absolutely shocking. Now, I guess part of that, Terry, is about the power of the documentary to kind of transmit those ideas. You're a filmmaker, you know this stuff inside out, back to front. Why can film be so powerful if it's done right? And can you conceive something that might be able to carry the kind of message that we all want to be carried about just how wrong the system is in terms of the kind of corruption and connivance that's going on. Any thoughts around that kind of space, Terry?
Again, it's interesting because the difference between a catharsis power to stimulate and provoke an audience into individual or collective yearning for transcendence, for change in the truest sense of the term.
Yeah.
The thin line between that and propaganda is getting ever thinner. And it's interesting because governments, again, and as I said, this goes back to Aristotle. I teach this stuff. So it's a house narrative structure influences us and impacts us on an individual and collective nature is something that theater makers and filmmakers and television makers and songwriters and poets have been obsessed with forever. But bizarrely, we're now getting to a stage where we can see, we use words like triggering. We know how to trigger people now. But people are learning how to behave from television and films. They're learning how to imitate being triggered. They're learning how to imitate empathy, learning how to imitate activism, because it's actually about a kind of narcissism as opposed to a collective or individual transformation. So it's more important that you film yourself weeping rather than try to understand what is the context of the weeping. It's more important to talk about your reaction to something rather than to try and interrogate where the power came from. But I still know, I do know, thankfully, I know that film has the power still to create a collective cathartic response in an audience that governments are terrified of. It's why social media needs to be controlled by them, because they need to constantly control that narrative. It's why they're bringing in the most draconian censorship laws imaginable. And bizarrely and perversely, this is being celebrated by the left. There's no time in history when censorship was ever used by anybody except those in corrupt power to control those with no power. That has always been the function of censorship. Now we've reversed its meaning and we're pretending that censorship is somehow to the benefit of the vulnerable. And it's such a fallacy. But yet, I think there is a huge yearning in people to get back to the basic, simple idea of truth. Again, words like love. And film has that power. Film has the ability to take you on a transcendent journey for 2 hours or whatever, that by the end of it, your presumed moral position, the function of film, the function of a setup is to confront your presumed moral position. Once your presumed moral position is confronted in a way that the seeds are sown for you to question it and to question your behavior, question your thought process, question the consequence of your action or inaction, that becomes the beginning of something potentially remarkable. And again, that story with the post office is a perfect example. But the other reality is that there were so many people who knew how horrific those people were being treated, and they did nothing and they didn't care. I think it's back to that idea. And again, I'll give this as an example, and I'm not trying to be controversial. Whatever you're feeling on abortion, that's fine. If a woman or a couple wants to have an abortion, they should be legally allowed to do so. For me, there's no conversation needs to be had there. But when that conversation is turned into words like compassion, when that conversation is turned into words like refusing to even recognize the life form of the unborn child, when that conversation is turned into an aggressive attack on anybody who questions the idea of the most vulnerable life form there is, we find ourselves in a position where we realize that you need to click your brain into a different way of seeing the world in order to justify that kind of dehumanization of both the self and another person. And increasingly, more and more people are not just accepting that dehumanization, but embracing it, because it comes without responsibility, it comes without consequence, and in fact, it comes with reward. And that, I think, that pendulum you're talking about, that pendulum is still swinging too much in that direction.
That point you're making about this kind of the way that these aren't your words, the way the narrative gets kind of twisted and deliberately distorted and flipped around, and the innocent are made to feel like they're the guilty. This is a theme that comes up a lot in our space, Terry. We've got so many people on this call, and many others, of course, who are victims of outright misconduct by the banks, people who have been tricked and cheated into buying things they should never have bought, whether it's directly because of from bankers, in pinstripe suits, so to speak, or from online scammers. They've been tricked into doing stuff. But so often, when they try to get justice, the system, the establishment, the agencies make them feel in some way culpable, or in some way guilty, or in some way stupid for having fallen for it. And it's so damned upsetting. It really is so damned upsetting. We know, for example, there are people who have had, and I know this to be fact, there are people who have had their entire pension fund stolen from them by scammers, who have been made to feel so bad about it and so guilty about it. There are men who've had their pension fund stolen who haven't plucked up the courage to tell their wives about it. And they're living with that sense of, oh my God, I feel so guilty about the mistake I made by giving those people my pension fund, and they then went and spent it on whatever they spent it on. That twisted narrative bit comes up in our world quite a bit, and it's actually pretty scary because it seems to have this kind of corrosive effect on people's confidence and willingness to fight back, and they end up not fighting back as much as they could. Am I explaining this okay, Terry? You get what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
But when they talk about the new normal, remember that phrase? That phrase became so much a part of our language in less than 24 hours. It's incredible to watch it around the world, the new normal. And excuse me, part of the new normal is the normalization of obscenity. Now, when you feel that there is a justice system out there that will protect you in a case like you just described, that gives you courage. But when that justice system protects the people who stole from you, it doesn't just rob you of courage, it robs you of the capacity to take any kind of action. And that's a very powerful thing. So when the less powerful we are as individuals and as communities, the greater the power of the untouchable becomes. And that's what they're doing across the board. So the idea of the consequence of action leading to some form of justice, we know it to be a lie. And one of the things about what happened with the post office is that despite the overwhelmingly beautiful human response from the viewer on the story, how long ago did it happen? And how many people facilitated the absolute abhorrent destruction of so many other people's lives, and facilitated with full knowledge and willingly for a paycheck, or because they were afraid to question their boss. Now, one of the things I worked on a soap opera. I wrote over 100 episodes of a soap opera for my sins. And one of the things that there was a producer there, Niall Matthews was his name, a wonderful man. And he explained to me one time, I was at the writing a script and he was saying, this is great. This is fantastic. You need to rewrite it. Why? It's too good. And I thought he was being facetious, or I thought he was being patronizing. He says, no, let me explain to you. He said, if you go to McDonald's every day and you get a 99-cent burger, you want that 99-cent burger. If you go to McDonald's and someone gives you a steak, a fine blue steak, and it's a beautiful piece of meat, and you eat that, you're suddenly going to realize that 99-cent burger is a piece of shit. And now McDonald's is going to have to start giving you steak. So the last thing they want is steak. And what we're being fed every day is a 99-cent burger that's now becoming a 49-cent burger, until eventually we're so hungry that we'll take anything. And once we know that the person, and again, it's back to the dehumanization process, but the function of soap opera is to create as many dramatic peaks as possible within any given short time frame, and then all is equilibrium again. All goes right back to where it used to be. And that's what they're doing. Politics now is a soap opera, and I don't mean that in a larger sense of the term. I mean the literal sense of the term. The function of soap opera is to stimulate you into having a whole series of brief injections of pleasure and pain and fear and eroticization and whatever the hell you want to call it. And within that tiny time frame, and then it cuts to an ad break to sell you a whole bunch of things that make you even more insecure. Then you go back to it. And then as the final music ends for that episode, you breathe a sigh of relief. And then you turn around and you look at your Chinese takeaway and your beer, and you swear that you'll try and get it healthy tomorrow. And then you switch on to the next channel and the next soap opera. That's a brilliantly effective tool. And they've never had that mass ability before. And now they have it through social media. So it's soap opera on a higher level. That's brief serotonin rush that leads to making you feel more vulnerable, more alone, so you will pay more money to get what they promise you, which is a lie. Sorry for sounding so cynical.
The general sort of place you're coming from with your cynicism and your skepticism is shared by us. We're on the same wavelength, Terry. We really are. There are people on this call who, for 10 plus years, have been battling to try to get the authorities and the courts to recognise the wrongs that have been done. And absolutely, we're with you on that. In terms of our march on the 18th of September, we'll be doing all we can to get some attention. We'll be doing all we can to try to make everyone know that lots of us are dissatisfied with the status quo, that enough is enough, that there needs to be change. Do you have any thoughts, Terry, about what our call to action could be or should be? I know I'm putting you on the spot here. You've not, had questions in advance here, but if you were kind of strategizing our campaign, what do you think, if anything, that comes to mind? Maybe nothing does. What do you think, if anything, we ought to be trying to actually make happen that's different? Any thoughts on that?
Again, we touched on it the other night, but it's that simple idea. You're next. We don't seem to understand that if they can do this to anybody, what's that song? If you tolerate this, then your children will be next. The reality is that you're next. And it's only a matter of time. When you create enough division, the power of division is that if there's 100 people and they're divided into two groups of 50, and then those two groups of 50 are divided into two groups of 25, and then those two groups of 25 are divided into two groups of 12 and a half. You see what happens? Reverse exponentially. It gets smaller and smaller until eventually there's only two left. And your choice, your decision is to destroy the person in front of you or be destroyed. That's how division works. That's its power. The inevitability of you being next.
Terry, thank you. Let's talk about the idea, and it's just the idea of some kind of documentary or film to carry the message that we think needs to be said. We've obviously got no idea about the film industry or making documentaries, all that kind of thing, right? What would be your thoughts, Terry, about the best way of going about trying to do something like that? And just let me just put this on record, as it were. Given the very, very obvious authenticity about which you go about your work and in which you feel the things you feel, it would be wonderful from our point of view to be involved with something like this, Terry, if that was possible. But putting that to the side, if we were dead serious as we are about trying to create a film, a documentary to articulate that people are being shafted left, right, and centre, and that the judicial system is corrupted, and that the politicians aren't trying hard enough, and that innocent people are having their homes unlawfully taken from them. Well, what could we think about trying to do to make that kind of thing happen? Any thoughts there?
Well, again, the only experiential knowledge I have of this, we talked about it the other day, is I did a film called Patrick's Day, and it's a film that's about the right to intimacy for people with mental illness. And that film, I was made for about, I think, 460,000, which in film terms is a tiny budget. But that film ended up, it had its world premiere at South by Southwest in America, which is a huge festival. And it was the first Irish film ever selected to be there. It was a big deal, supposedly. But that film went around the world. It brought me around the world, brought me to multiple continents, multiple countries I never thought I would go to. And the same response happened over and over, where after the screening, profound question and answer session would lead to people slowly raising their hand, and a tiny little voice would come out of the darkness, and people would begin to tell their story, their experience of mental institutions, their experience of the dehumanization of people who claim to be protectors of them. Now, the consequence of that was that, along with another film, it became instrumental in changing the laws of how mentally ill people are treated in our country. Now, the only reason anybody gave a damn about that film in terms of the government was because there was two major figures. It was Professor Ivor Brown and Dr. Gareth O'Connor, and both of those men were mavericks on the world stage. They were Irish, but they were mavericks on the world stage. Dr. Gareth O'Connor was the head of the Johns Hopkins, and Professor Ivor Brown was, again, world-renowned. And both of them said that the film should be used as a teaching tool. Yes, baby?
Your minutes are up.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be right down. Both of them became not just massive advocates of the film, but they went public about it. And again, I can send you some material. But
thank you.
As a consequence of it, when we have, this is an hour and 40 minutes of a film that led to extraordinary conversations and extraordinary consequence, and again, changed the law. But the biggest fear for the government was, how did this small little film become a talking point in America? How did it become a talking point in Australia, in China, in Russia? Which it did, and it won awards in all those places. So we need to consider the idea of making a film. And again, it's back to something very simple. They say, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Really, really simple. A simple story about, I hate this phrase, ordinary people. It's a phrase that always sickens me because it's used by politicians all the time. There's nothing ordinary about the lives of people going through these things. Nothing extraordinary or nothing ordinary whatsoever. It's profoundly extraordinary. But taking the life of somebody who we would largely ignore on the large celebrity stage of narcissism and self-elevation, and take their tale, their story, this man or woman, part of a family, who are so incredibly innocent when it comes to the reality of how the system works, that their belief is the relentless and noble belief that somebody is going to intercede on their behalf. Somebody will intercede on our behalf because we are right and they are wrong, and we live in a just society. And then the realization at the end of the first act that not only is nobody going to intercede, but they're going to feed off their carcasses. And then the realization that that person has got to change or they're going to die. Their family is going to die. Everything, that their whole belief system has to be profoundly altered. And it has to be profoundly altered in a weaponized way, a dangerous way, a way that is causing damage to them, not to the system. And then halfway through that, they have to realize that the damage is being done to them, and they have to find a way to try and fight back against the system. And that, to me, would be the 3-act structure of it. And that story can be anybody's story. My suggestion would be to talk to a series of people who've gone through this and start to build a story around that.
Terry, thank you very much. In a moment, I'm going to invite some of the folks who we've spoken to before, who've been speaking with you before, folks like Brian and Michelle.
Nearly over.
Okay.
Brian and Michelle.
Say hello to these people. Just,
he's got such a colourful face.
painting it blue for Beetlejuice.
Great stuff. Great. You'll enjoy it, I'm sure.
It's nearly over now.
Okay, I'll be down in 5 minutes.
You have 1 minute until you go.
Okay.
That's so sweet.
That's the future there. Sorry.
We'll wrap up when you need to, Terry. So it's all relaxed. But in a moment, we'll go to Brian and Michelle and Tony and Byron, folks who may want to put some points or questions to you. Okay. It's been so interesting. We would love to work with you and find a way of working with Terry. And if obviously part of this is going to be the heavy lifting on the funding side, and as you know, we'll be reaching out to folks in the States and elsewhere to see what might be possible. But from what you've just said, it sounds like, how can I put this? There's already a structure in your head about how this could be done. You know, can you kind of see how this could be done from a creative filmmaking point of view?
Yeah, but see, structure is structure, and I teach structure, so I'm obsessed with structure. But again, you asked earlier about the consequence of having spoken up. I had 3 screenplays that were ready for production after Patrick's Day. Patrick's Day was a big success. I was suddenly lauded around town and given multiple awards around the world and the whole lot. And then suddenly, bang, everything is gone. And all state funding is pulled. All support systems are gone. And that's because you question the system. So one of the things we need to understand that is in Ireland, they control, and it's not really applied to music, thankfully, because musicians are independent. But when it comes to television and film and theater, the national narrative is controlled by people who protect the government. And whether they're not intended that to be the case, the reality is that their finance depends on it. So you will not get anybody who will be prepared to question the narrative controlled by the government in theater, film, or television. And it's an extraordinary wake-up call to realize that what appears to be an act of benevolence is in fact evidently very clearly an act of control.
And that's clearly a real worry, and that tells me that we need to look elsewhere outside of Ireland to get the backing and support that needs to be found. Terry, thank you very much. Let's go ladies first. Michelle, if you're happy to, did you have any comments or questions that you'd like to put to Terry? And after Michelle, we'll go to Brian. Your line's a bit squeaky. I know it is sometimes, but we should be able to hear you, Michelle. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, Terry. That was really interesting, and I suppose what you described, I would have real examples of from myself and the mothers that I represent. So Andy has invited me to this group, but I actually advocate for mothers in the family law and the childcare courts in Ireland who are not getting justice. So even though this is, a lot of representatives here in relation to the financial industry, actually it's quite similar, the court system and sort of the punishing, as you said, for standing up or asking questions. So what really resonated with me was your policing thought. We come across that a lot with mothers who are protecting children. So the first thing that will happen is in a marriage, perhaps as an example, a mother will go to a court to look for protection. Those courts are all secret. Anything to do with a child is a secret, or a family. In the courts, you are not allowed to publish anything in public, and the court is closed off just to the participants. This is the policing thought around this is, so you're told it's to protect children, the secret courts, as we like to call them. It's actually in law. It's a Latin term called in camera, which means in chamber. And what happens in chamber, in the courtroom, you actually would not believe. There is little procedure, a lot of hearsay, and if a child discloses sexual abuse, they are either taken off their mother. If the mother, on behalf of the child, says that there's any sort of abuse, that child will either be taken by the state or given to the father, who was the perpetrator in most cases. If you're listening to the Irish news today, there's a very controlled debate around articles that came out. There was a report about past sexual abuse in education, in our educational system. And it happened a long time ago. A lot of the perpetrators are dead, and it's controlled by the media. And they have the cheek to come out today and say, the people who were bystanders, watching this and knowing what was going on, are as culpable as the, teachers. And those radio stations and those TV people are the very people who are silencing, child sexual abuse today. So like that, the policing thought, domestic violence, there is a government campaign called, zero tolerance. But we know in reality on the ground, the way the law is written for, our protection agency, TUSLA, is actually not a protection agency in law. So they do not protect children. They promote that children are protected. So what they do is they change the narrative of the mother. She's come and reported sexual abuse, so she's an alcoholic. She's mental. Put her in a mental institute. But so it's sort of like that. Today they have bundled up an old tragedy of the past. A lot of the perpetrators are dead. They're speaking in the past, as if it's not happening now. They are speaking in the past tense. So that was very, policing thought to me, they are making the zero tolerance on violence. It is actually in practice, we know from the mothers. And I've gone through this personal experience myself, which I'm actually now grateful for, because I'm able for it. And, let's get moving on this. But zero tolerance for domestic violence strategies in the Department of Justice, in actual fact, in reality, is zero tolerance of the victim. And they have done lots to set up lots of laws and barriers, and Women's Aid listens. They do nothing more. There's another agency that informs government if you tell them your story. So there's a lot of people doing things that are pretending to do one thing but are not doing another, and it's actually it's quite serious, and so that's what we see in the courts, not working for children and mothers. And judges are completely biased. They're breaching their oath all the time. Government people, media, they're not listening to us, and they will not change the law to get a child protection agency. The only laws that we have to protect children are on Garda Síochána, and they just turn a blind eye to sexual abuse crimes in general. So basically, it's spin. So thank you very much.
Michelle, thank you very much indeed. Terry may well want to come back to you on some of the points you made, Michelle, before we then go to Brian. Terry, thank you.
Michelle, I'm on the verge of tears here listening to you. Unfortunately, I know a lot about what you're talking about in terms of anecdotally and hearsay and so on and so forth, but obviously you're experiencing it on the ground and firsthand. I can't even begin to imagine the pain of that, but I do know the structure of what you're talking about. And again, it's where fallacy becomes fact and truth becomes irrelevant. And when you see that being used by the judiciary and by a court system and by people in power, and you're standing there and you're in comprehension, you're going, everybody in this room knows this is a lie. And yet we all remain silent. I'd love to talk to you further about this because, again, in terms of a larger narrative, I like my only knowledge of this is my ex-partner is a midwife. She's a lactation consultant and a brilliant one, an amazing woman. But every day you see women. We again, and I give the example of abortion, not because of.
Dada,
Just,
can we go now?
Yes, we can. Go on, go ahead, go girl, give your dress. Not because of any moral position on it. Again, it's the individual's choice. But that idea of we will put 4 times more money into facilitating an abortion than we will into facilitating a birth. We will make sure that we talk at length about women's rights, and yet women are herded like cattle into the hospital and put on the equivalent of conveyor belts so that the consultant can be at the golf course at 3 p.m. The reality of what we claim to be doing versus the actuality,
Daddy,
as you know yourself. Yes.
can you give me keys to Granddad's car now?
I can't. Mama has it there.
Oh.
Yeah. So
she's got to win the award for the cutest child there's ever been with the things on her face there. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Michelle. Let's go to Brian. Terry, we'll work to whatever time frames you need to. So if you need to go, just let us know. Give us a few minutes notice and we'll adjust accordingly, okay? In all honesty, all right?
No, again, thank you. I feel incredibly bad-mannered here. And again, Michelle, I hope to speak with you again at length about this, but thank you so much for what you said there. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, Michelle. Brian, what would you like to say to Terry?
Just before Terry goes there, I just have to say, as always, spellbound listening to him. And, Michael and I and others have had the privilege of Terry's company on a number of occasions. And it's just, that saying, Andy, that Paddy and you and I share that things happen for a reason. Well, I can only presume that Terry's come back into our lives for a reason, and it's becoming pretty clear what that is. Now, funny enough, I have a word I had just picked out here that one of our greatest challenges and enemies is the apathy of the general population. And I just noticed before I uttered those words that Michael Durkin himself has put it up in the chat, apathy. And that's very true. It's also interesting listening to Terry describing there about that, that apathy is built from, I'm all right, Jack, it won't happen to me. And then reality hits someday and you find yourself or a relative on a hospital trolley, and then you're all up in arms, or your pension is gone and you're up in arms again. Or a vulture fund now claims to own your mortgage and you've no funds to fight them, and we've no legal aid here. So all of these things, now we can't get the mainstream media to really get to grips with this, which is why this idea of a in-your-face docu-film or documentary picking up on what was achieved in the UK with Bates, because what rings in my ears from my own experience is this thing. I remember back 8 years ago, where a very senior bank guy said to me, I said to him, you must be inundated with all these types of issues. And he said, no, you're the only one, actually. And that resonated when that was said to Mr. Bates as well in the UK. And then it's only when he got a small gathering of people together that they realized they'd all been told the same strategic lies that we're being told to this day. So I look forward to developing where this can go. And as always, Andy, I take my hat off to you and your organizational skills and your interest and the intellect you're bringing to it. So well done.
Thank you, Brian. I don't know about that, but it really is a great team effort all round. Terry, you go whenever you need to go. But once you've gone, I would like Mark Bannister to.
Oh, sorry, Andy. Sorry to interrupt. I wouldn't have been so nice to Terry if I'd known he was still there.
Well, once Terry needs to go, I would love Mark Bannister, who's with us tonight, to flesh out a bit of a brainstorm he had, a bit of a light bulb moment, a genius idea he had this afternoon to do with a pledge. So, Mark, please be ready to talk about your idea shortly. Whilst Terry's still with us, let's go to Byron. Byron, if you don't mind, briefly introduce yourself, because there are folk here who know nothing about the Hub Island at all, because they're not part of the normal community. They've come to this especially because of Terry. Byron, tell everybody a bit about the Hub Island, then share with us whatever you'd like to. Thank you.
My name is Byron Jenkins. I run the Hub Island, which is a self-help support group. We're probably the only group out there with that sort of situation. We take people and we tell them where they're at, what the course is going to be, and where we'll be in a year's time or 2 years' time or any given time. And we also help them through the courts. Irish courts are paper courts. Everything has to be on affidavit. So that's what we do there. We've been going since 2013. We've seen and helped probably about 14,000 families in that time. And that's where it comes in, self-help support group. So we give them the tools to run their cases because, like Brian says, there's no legal aid out there. But getting back to Terry there, I think the storyline you've got there is absolutely fantastic. It literally is what the Hub is, how people come to us in a complete and utter state, mentally, excuse me, and also physically. You know, we end up counselling people, although we're not trained to counsel, but 13 years or odd, you kind of build up a track record. They've actually got statistics on us, believe it or not. The statistics are, and the most shocking one is, as a lay litigant or a family in the courts, you will turn up 7 times only. You won't be there number 8. And we see that so often that people just give up. They can't take the pain anymore. If you look on courts.ie, the legal diary, you'll see 50, 60, 70 cases up on any given day. You'll be lucky if 4 people turn up. If you don't turn up on three times, it's classed as giving it up on consent, and the registrar will put a possession order in place. Yeah, and that is not appealable. You cannot appeal it because it's on consent. So my world, our world here in Hubland is pure mad, firefighting all the time.
Every time I think about what you and your good lady wife, Adrienne, every time I think about what yourself and Adrienne are doing and the amount of people you're doing it for, it's just gobsmacking. It really is. I don't think there's anything like it in the UK. I think you must be a bit of a one-off.
We are working with, at any given time, probably about 3,000 people.
It's just like,
madhouse.
My goodness me. I'm going. Thank you, Byron. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to invite Mark Bannister. We'll be wrapping up at 6:30, folks, which is the time we were scheduled to. You'll note that Terry's put his contact details in the chat. I think that's wonderful. So, folks, if you have any reason to want to contact Terry, he's clearly making himself available. And please do make a note of those details if you want to connect with him. Please do. Mr. Mark Bannister, could you Could you share with everybody the gist of the conversation we had this afternoon? It was lovely receiving what was quite frankly an excited phone call from you about the idea, and hopefully we can start to flesh it out amongst ourselves. Because folks, I think Mark's got the beginnings of a bit of genius here with what we might be able to do. Mark Bannister, please tell everybody a bit about yourself first, because of course not everybody will know you here. Thank you.
Well, for all of those that do know me, forgive me. That's a blight on your lives to start with. But anyway, I used to be a long time ago a banker. I worked for a little outfit called Morgan Stanley, and I left them because they fired me, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. It sort of set me free and allowed me to be the person that I wanted to be, rather than the person that had become financially very successful but very controlled. And I did a whole series of things, some successful, some not. And then I ended up getting involved with, or at least my family did, with RBS GRG. And like so many of you, I've been fighting them since 2008. In fact, I don't so much fight them as sidestep them. That's probably my greatest achievement thus far. Because fighting them is actually a fool's errand, in my view, which is why you will have heard me on many occasions in other meetings say that I want to see financial services reformed and made to be the type of ethically driven and soundly based industry that it could be. And I've said this to Andy and used this metaphor previously, if all of you went on holiday on a plane on the same basis that you've interacted with financial services, you'd never have reached your destination. There would be nobody sitting out there listening to me now. So we have to get back to that for financial services, and it's capable of doing so. And the absolute irony of this is, were we to achieve it, it would be world class, because it would be the only one that operated on that basis. And trust me, if customers, they're often driven by greed, but motivated by fear. And you can be as successful as you like in a rising market, but if you lose it all on the way back down, then it didn't serve you very well. And ultimately, people want security. So as much as we're all enticed in the moment by profit and gain, actually, when things are dark, you want to know that there's something still in the cupboard. And so there we are. Anyway, that's me. So this idea, it stemmed from a meeting that I was a part of with some of you earlier today. And we were brainstorming about slogans for the march, etc. And I made some stupid commentary, which Andy then seized upon and promptly suggested that I make some contributions and write stuff down. So I was doing that. And because I have a way when I'm writing of just allowing my mind to wander about to see what it can find and what can hop out, this idea hopped into my mind. And I have previously said to Andy that the march is all very well, but it has to go somewhere. It has to have a life beyond the day. And suddenly this idea hopped into my head, and it is that we create something called the Irish Citizens Pledge, shortened to the ICP. So it's got a nice, catchy little acronym that everybody can remember and everybody can get behind. And it's twofold. Okay, it's bi-directional. It's what the pledge is that the citizen makes of what he wants from the forthcoming election. And equally, it's a demand on the politicians to affirm that they will deliver this pledge, because they're going to pledge to it too. And Andy sent me, then we had a quick discussion, and Andy sent me something that he'd been working up with a view to a forthcoming UK election, except as you all know, it got pulled early and caught almost everybody off guard. And so it never got used. And but I have responded to Andy to say that I think what those pledges are and how they operate should be something for all of you who are Irish, not a burden imposed upon you by an Englishman. After all, there's a bit of history there that's not gone well. And so that wouldn't be a good start in my view. So I'm just turning this idea over to you. But where I think its power comes from, and this is where Terry could play a huge and important part, instrumental, in fact, is because I think it needs to be run through TikTok and social media so that everybody says, I've signed up to the pledge. I agree with the pledge. And here's my little short clip that I recorded on my iPhone, and I've uploaded it onto TikTok, and I'm part of it. Now, it needs to be recognizable. So I would, for instance, you know, like all these campaigns of different sorts all seem to have a ribbon of stuff. I would make the ribbon as a continuous sequence of the Irish flag, the three colors of the Irish flag. And so everybody who has joined the thing and signed up to it wears their little bit of ribbon, and all the politicians do. And everybody can utilize it to brand it effectively on their uploaded video. And then what you also, I think, want to do is try and get as many of the sports stars, TV stars, personalities, cultural icons to sign up to this and do it, so that ultimately it becomes an embarrassment if you haven't. And you create a hugely powerful, and you can do this globally, because let's face it, there are far, far more Irish people abroad than there are domestically, but that doesn't matter. And you know, you just want them to express their solidarity with what it is that you're trying to attain and achieve. And so that's the genesis of my idea. I have lots of thoughts about how you could practically implement it. But you know, it's up to you all to seize on it if you think it's a good idea and you can make it work. But I commend it to you.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. And folks, thank you very much indeed for the idea of setting it out so clearly. What I've just put in the chat, folks, is just something to begin to work with. Okay, I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that these are the actual words that we'll end up settling on. This is just the beginning of a process, the beginning of floating an idea and seeing what people think. Well, I think we would want the wording to be the kind of words that any decent-minded politician would be happy to commit to. Nothing specific, just general values-based commitment that both the politician can sign up to and the individual feels comfortable demanding. So something like, at the upcoming general election in Ireland, I will only vote for a politician who commits to the Irish Citizens' Pledge, where they make this promise: I will always act in an ethical, transparent and trustworthy manner, and I shall accept the consequences if I do not. I commit to fighting corruption, to refuse to tolerate unfairness, and to stand up for justice, particularly when my constituents are having to undertake David versus Goliath battles against rich and powerful opponents. I thought about putting something like, for example, the banks and vulture funds at the end of that, but I don't think we need to. I think that kind of goes without saying.
Andy, if I can just say, I would absolutely guard against that. And my slight criticism of the existing wording you've proposed is it's slightly financially orientated. And I want this as the broadest church.
Well, I get it. I get it.
I want everybody of every type to feel that they can sign up to this. And I want, you know, the people who make their short little videos saying I'm on board to be extolling the virtues. I live in this part of Ireland. Isn't it wonderful? This is why ICP is special to me. I want the people who've got a special interest group that they pursue. I want them to be able to say, this is why it's important to me. I want school children to be able to say, you know, this is our future. That's why ICP is important to me. And so on and so forth, so that it should be a circumstance that excludes no one and includes everyone. And that, just that when the politicians realize, right, that they've suddenly, there's an organization that's everybody's signed up to and centered them, that's a devastating, that begins at where Terry left off in his conversation. That's how you begin to seize the narrative away from the politicians and you take it back.
Well, thank you very much. Folks, we'll work on this. This is a starting point for us, okay? This is a starting point. But where it could work really nicely is in relation to the press statements and the media coverage we'll be trying to get around the march. Folks, it's coming up to 6:30. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation we've had with Terry. I really genuinely find him such an incredibly thought-provoking and engaging person to listen to. I really do. I hope you enjoyed that conversation too. I'm going to go to what we call gallery mode so I can see everybody. Please do raise your hand if you'd like to share a thought, whether you've done so previously or not. We've got Hubert here. Hubert, short and sweet would be great because I want to squeeze in as many of these as possible. I'd also love to hear from Seamus May, from Michael Durkin, Cormac, anybody else that wants to chip in to the conversation, folks. Hubert, keep it short for me, please, but please tell us what is front of mind for you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Andy. I've already had my experiences in marching against a bank in Northern Ireland. My wife and I and some friends from Birmingham and from Glasgow have been with me, and we have found the most effective marches were at the venues where the banks support events. For instance, the World Golf Championships were held here in Northern Ireland, Portrush, about 3 years ago, and we took part there. The other thing, I designed a high-vis vest, and you can print anything on that, and you can wear it, and it's comfortable. We also have banners printed here in Northern Ireland. And the one thing that I've also got a very close friend, colleague, who was a senior director in one of the banks here in Northern Ireland until Mr. Goodwin took over and he had enough. Now, the one thing that he has taught me, and he's still there, and I've just had a phone call from him during this conversation.
Right.
What the banks do not like, cannot tolerate, will do anything, will bend over backwards in every way, is bad publicity. The more you can get the message out there, and this is where Terry comes in, I believe that we have made this mistake since 2007. We have been individuals too afraid to confess to our mistakes. Now, my mistake has cost me 6 to 7 million. Now, I have just turned up in the last 2 days some information that will be devastating when I want to use it and when I do use it. I am looking forward to it, and Andy, I will be more than happy to share it with the group.
Please do. Please do.
The situation that we are all in is we are all individuals. The post office got together as a group, and as a group, they had power. We have no power. I know of groups in Northern Ireland, and they don't talk to each other. And I believe it's absolute nonsense. Where we have got to be is in a group like the post office and all talking with one voice. Now, Mark, I believe, has the substance of a great idea, but we've all got to be talking to each other. Now, I was very impressed by Terry last week, and also the guy from the Irish Times. I think it was the Irish Times newspaper. Leo.
Theo. Yes, Theo McDonald. That's right. The report. Yeah, Hubert. We're running out of time, so if you don't mind,
Okay.
I'll cut it there. But it's great to know that you were impressed by Terry and also Theo. Thank you very much. I want to quickly go to Seamus, then to Michael Durkin, then to Ian Duffel, then to anybody else who'd like to chip in after that. So, Seamus, your key thoughts, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I haven't an awful lot to say because there's wonderful people here. Terry, who I've been listening to for quite a long time, he's been so impressive last week and this week, and you know he hugely adds to the group. One of the things the Irish Citizens Pledge, and Hubert alluded to this there a minute ago. In Ireland, in Southern Ireland, we have hundreds upon hundreds of groups, all basically, you know, saying the same thing as us. Some of them doing it in a way that mightn't approve of, others doing it in different ways. But there's several pledges out there at the moment. There's a pledge on migration, and there was the pledge, the Barrington statement was about COVID and all that. So what I've been saying is that we are very, very divided and split, and that is because the media suffocates us. There's no question about it. And once you go on to social media, then you become a target. You know, once you say use the word immigration, you're far right, and that's the big challenge is to try and bring us all together. But we don't have mainstream media. We don't even have local radio. None of these things work for us. And the last thing I'd say is that the thing that struck me most all night was what Terry said about the demeanor of Simon Coveney, because he is absolutely right. And that's what's wrong with all our politicians. They're all this, no, not them all, there's a few decent ones, as we know, but I thought he had it summed up terribly well with Coveney.
Wow, I'm going to spend some time learning more about this Mr. Coveney chap. Thank you very much indeed, Seamus. Let's jump to Michael Durkin.
Thanks, Andy.
You don't want
wonderful as always, and Terry, of course, is a dear friend of ours, and he just exemplifies everything. Not only that's wrong about Ireland or wherever it might be, but he also gives us that hope that there are solutions out there. And what I'd like to do is just to focus on a very practical thing coming up to the 18th. The government handed us on a plate 4 days ago an unbelievable opportunity, whereby in the government buildings they built a shelter for 18 bicycles. Right, it's like a lean-to, and it cost €338,000, the equivalent of building a house. And it has hit a raw nerve with everybody in Ireland as to how this has come about. And it's only one example of some very serious accountability problems we have here. We currently have the most expensive building on planet Earth being built in Dublin, the Children's Hospital, which currently is at €2.3 billion. Was supposed to open in 23, 24, and 25. Current estimates are that it will potentially open in 26 at a cost of €3 billion. Jeffrey Archer put forward 100 million to build a similar size hospital in London with 140 million from the government. Now, I see the 18th, and I think we need to focus on the 18th to come up with something really that's going to get us publicity across all mediums. And I suggest that we focus in now and do something with this opportunity that they've given to us in relation to this bike shed. a bike shed, €338,000. Somebody put up a post there recently that we could have built a house for the same amount of money. Another gentleman in the space said he could have built, it should have cost €20,000. So what I'll do is I'll speak with yourself and Brian and see if we can come up with something unique that we can wheel, or that would maybe go along with 18 bicycles at the front of the queue. We'll come up with something that's going to be evocative, that will stir the imagination of the media.
Well, Michael, thanks. I didn't know anything about this bike show. I've just got online and I found something which, oh, sorry. I just found a link to something about somebody talking about this this crazy situation. Michael, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Mr. Ian Duffield. Many of you won't know Ian, but Ian is one of the victims of the Woodford scandal. He's a Brit. Ian, please do share any thoughts you'd like to. We're going to be wrapping up shortly, so please be as succinct as you conveniently can. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and hi everybody in Ireland. Yes, I'm a Brit. I will say, and this is a word I very, very rarely use, but listening to Terry, I found the things he had to say being absolutely profound. And I hardly ever use that word, but I was absolutely amazed by the things that he said. And this is an observation, really, that you may find as an interesting parallel to a number of the things that I've heard people talk about here this evening. And that's that my big issue is with the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, in England, the FCA, and their incredibly appalling behaviour, because the FCA was set up or came about in the year 2000 as part of the Financial Services and Markets Act that Parliament put into law. So effectively, we've got parliamentarians saying, because of the excesses of the financial services industry and their behaviours, we feel the need to bring in some legislation and set up a body to control them. The FCA, financial. It started off as something different, but became the FCA. And the amazing thing recently with the Woodford scandal, in which I've been sadly a victim of, is that as the FCA brokered an agreement with the perpetrators, or some of the perpetrators of that scandal, where they effectively got to walk away with a fraction of the money that they were responsible for losing. The man behind it, Neil Woodford, got to walk away with absolutely no penalties whatsoever, and he took something like 100 million in dividends along with his partner during the term of this scam. But the thing that I found a really interesting parallel in what Terry was talking about the way government tries to control the narrative and effectively tell you it's doing one thing when it's doing another, is while this has all been going on, the Treasury Department have been sitting there having real concerns about wanting the London financial markets to be a place where businesses will bring their business, because it's such a big earner. Yeah. Yet while doing that, the FCA goes and effectively brokers this agreement which forbade consumers from accessing the financial compensation scheme, which was put into law in the same act that brought about their existence. So everybody in Britain believed that this was a statutory consumer right, consumer protection, and they took it away. They wrote a clause into the scheme to say, here's what's going to happen. You'll get 3% of your money if you're lucky, but you won't be allowed to go to the compensation scheme, which was absolutely incredible turn of things. Now we've got a new government in. Sir Keir Starmer has said that it's got to be a government for the working man. He said that in his election pledges before he won the election. And now on taking power, they're saying, guess what? We want London financial services market to be the biggest and the best in the world. And we want to attract all of this good business, exactly the same narrative that the previous government used. And what I will find interesting is to see if he is going to take any action over this amazing U-turn by the FCA. And I suspect the answer will be no, because he will want to keep everything quiet, because he now wants to do exactly the same thing that the previous government did, which is let's have London the place for all these big businesses and financial services to come to. And what we don't want is pesky little consumers running around crying about how they've been ripped off and how they've been treated. And I think ultimately that will be the issue. So I found that very absolutely resonated with me, what Terry was saying about the control of the narrative from a government perspective, says one thing and is absolutely doing another. So, you know, that was my observation. But I found that absolutely fascinating, what he had to say.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, folks. I'm going to close by showing you a short YouTube clip. It's something I saw for the first time today, and I found it as a consequence of reading a book by Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis Varoufakis, if you don't know, was the Greek finance minister, who's a remarkably, in my opinion, a remarkably talented, gifted, insightful, experienced economist, academic, former finance minister. And what he referred to in this book was an exchange between an Irish journalist and a member of the central bank, European Central Bank. We haven't got time to go into the full context, but the gist of it is this Irish journalist was basically asking a very important question to do with why was it that the Irish people were having to pay money for something that was basically nothing to do with them at all. It's only a few minutes long, and I want to show it for a particular reason. I want to show it because it really speaks to the harsh reality that things have happened that just are simply completely and utterly unfair. I want to make sure I'm sharing this in the right way. So sound, you should be able to see this, I hope, and hear it. So here it is. Ian, can you give me a thumbs up when you can
ask the question?
Ian, give me a thumbs up when you can hear it, okay?
Of the three pay any appreciation of how the Irish public had responded to their presence here and to the rigours of the bailout deal. Klaus answered the question in the following way.
The attitude, as far as I can see or judge, and this is of course I have only a limited perspective, is very good. I'm impressed by the depth of the discussion in Ireland and the understanding of complex economic financial sector issues, which is revealed by looking into the Irish press, looking into the discussion, but also when I come from the airport with a taxi driver, they are often very well informed, I must say, very well informed. So I think that is a good sign that here we have an open discussion. It's a difficult adjustment process, but there is an open debate, and there's a debate where economic arguments play an important role, and I think that is how it should be.
I thought I'd ask him a little more about his conversations with the taxi driver. Let's have a look. Klaus Manisch, did your taxi driver tell you how the Irish people are bewildered that we are required to pay unguaranteed bondholders billions of euros for debts that the Irish people have no relation to or no bearing with, primarily to bail out or to ensure the solvency of European banks? And if your taxi driver asked you that question, or if the taxi driver had asked you that question, what would have been your response? That's my first question.
Well, can we take it? We take a couple to.
Folks, listen to this bit very, very carefully. Talk about trying to control the narrative. Listen to what the lady's about to say. Listen to what she's trying to do, and listen to how brilliantly the journalist won't have any of it. I think this is fantastic. It's a fantastically informative clip about what's really going on here, about what's really going on. These folks from the European Central Bank are basically supposed to be explaining what's going on, And you'll see that they're doing all they can to avoid doing that. Listen to what she says.
Together. Can you ask the second question?
Well, my second question is a completely different issue, and I may have a follow-through if Mr. Masters doesn't answer the question in a way that would illuminate the taxi driver's understanding of all this. I would have a follow-through question.
Right. Can I ask you then to pass the mic, and we come back to you for the second question?
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, that's a way of breaking up the exchange, and I would prefer if it went this way. We have a tradition in Irish journalism that we pursue issues, and that when somebody doesn't ask a question, we follow through on it. And I hope that tradition will be respected on this occasion. So, could you answer the question?
Yeah.
Mr. Vincent, I have answered a very similar question of you. I think it was 2 reviews ago. And
you addressed the question. You addressed the question previously.
I addressed the question. Yes. I answered it. I would say I can understand that this is a difficult decision to be made by the government, and there's no doubt about it. But there are different aspects of the problem to be balanced against each other, and I can understand that the government came to the view that all in all the costs for the Irish people, for the stability of the banking system, for the confidence in the banking system, of taking certain action in this respect, which you are mentioning, could likely have been much bigger than the benefits for the taxpayer, which of course would have been there. So the financial sector would have been affected. The confidence of the financial sector would have been negatively affected, and I can understand that there was a difficult decision, but that the decision was taken in this direction.
Yeah, that doesn't address the issue. We are required to pay in respect of a defunct bank. There's no bearing on the welfare of the Irish people at all. We're required to pay in respect of this defunct bank billions on unguaranteed bonds in order to ensure the health of European banks. Now, what would you explain? How would you explain that situation to the taxi driver that you talked about earlier?
I think I have addressed the question.
No, you haven't addressed the question, because you've referred to the viability of the Irish financial institutions. This financial institution I'm talking about is defunct. It's over, it's finished. Now, why are the Irish people required, under threat from the ECB, why are the Irish people required to pay billions to unguaranteed bondholders under threat to the ECB? You didn't answer the question the last time, so maybe you'd answer it this time.
Well, I think he doesn't have anything to add to what he's already said.
Just a minute. This isn't good. This isn't good enough.
Sorry,
this isn't good enough. You people are intervening in this society, causing huge damage by requiring us to make payments not for the benefit of anybody in Ireland, but for the benefit of European financial institutions. Now, could you
key point here? What's being done, basically, as I understand it, is the money was being paid by Irish people, not for the benefits of Irish people or European people, but for particular European financial institutions that were on the brink of collapse. That's a very key word. He's saying it's for the European financial institutions.
Explain why the Irish people are inflicted with this burden.
Well, I think I have addressed the question.
You have nothing to say. There's no answer. Is that right? Is that it? No answer?
I have given an answer.
He's given an answer.
You have given an answer that doesn't address the question.
That's your view.
That is my view, and I think it would be the view of the taxi driver and the view of our viewers tonight.
Right. Can we please move on?
Folks,
I asked the question of the three people. Any appreciation of how...
I wanted to share that with you all as a blunt reminder that so much of the mess that the Irish economy was in and still is in, the austerity that took place, so much of the human cost and suffering that's plagued the UK with austerity over many years, etc., 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 goes all the way back to those times at and post the financial crisis, a crisis created by a relatively small number of people running big and powerful institutions. The conclusion that seemed to arise is that it was more important to protect the balance sheet of the institutions and the banks than it was the financial well-being and security of the people. And that, folks, is what this is all about. It's still going on. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to make off the back of that session before we bring the conversation to go to a close?
One thing, Andy, Tony Lawler here. One thing I'd like to say to you.
Please do, Tony. Please do. Thank you.
You said yourself there a few minutes ago that you wanted to educate yourself with regards to this Mr. Coveney.
Yeah.
I might suggest to you that the same journalist, Vincent Brown, had a program on RTE some years back called Today Tonight, where he had interviewing Mr. Coveney himself. And he went through Coveney for a shortcut. I would suggest that you look that up. I think it's actually on YouTube. I would suggest that you look that up and see Coveney's response, and you will see firsthand the evidence that Terry was speaking to with regard to cold eyes and the killer look of this, that he don't give a hoot about nobody.
Well. I definitely will hunt that out, Tony. Thank you so much. Folks, I've just put in the chat a tweet I sent this morning after having seen that clip I've just played you for the first time. If you wish, please do look at the tweet and share it, reply or share it, get the word out there, because we make reference to our march in that tweet as well. Thank you very much, Tony. I will definitely hunt that down on YouTube. Would anybody else like to come in with any final comments before we bring today's conversation to a close? Michelle, thank you. Michelle, thank you very much.
Sorry, very briefly, Andy. I spoke with Brian last week on another, just on general matters, and both our conversations culminated in, is all this white collar crime?
When you say is all this, are you talking about
the systems that have been created? The courts, the banks, all the state organizations that are helping, as you say there, Coveney, he's just an example of what they are. Yeah. Is it white collar crime, everything that we are dealing with here? Is that the umbrella?
No, let me tell you how I see it. Let me tell you how I see it, okay? And this is just my personal view. And I need to go off on a bit of a tangent, but I will come back to your question, I promise, Michelle. If we had a good, healthy democracy where the institutions that were set up originally to serve society, be they the judicial system or the regulatory system in financial services, etc., if we had a good, healthy democracy, then everything would be pretty much hunky-dory. There would still be problems, but everything would be pretty much hunky-dory. What I think's happened over the years is that the political structures we have, the party political structure that we have become dependent on, maybe, but certainly very strongly influenced by the banks. And if you read the paper that Mark Bannister wrote about the underlying causes of the conduct that is taking us all to take the streets of Dublin on the 18th of September, you will see that there seems to be this interdependency between the banking sector and the governments. UK applies to this, USA applies to this, Ireland applies to this. And therefore you end up with this kind of upside down situation. Instead of it being the people here elect the government here, who then controls the economy and society here, including the banks, we end up with like an inversion of that. We end up with the banks with all the money and the power, and so much money and power that they are too big and important to fail and too big and important to write off or get rid of. And they end up having massive influence over the way the governments work. And that in turn ends up having massive influence over what happens in society. And that ends up through this horrifically kind of corrosive, toxic osmosis way, feeding into various kinds of institutions failing to deliver. And depending on how cynical you are, you might see them as just being very bad and ineffective, or you could see them as being corrupt. If you, for example, look at the report that was published today in the UK about the Grenfell fire, 72 people lost their lives. All of that basically happened because everybody involved with the building wanted to make money, and they very simply put profit before the lives of people. So that's kind of how I see it, Michelle. I genuinely think the financial sector is having a profoundly unhealthy effect on the workings of our economy, and that manifests in all kinds of financial services situations. But I think it also helps to explain some of the unfairness and the travesties of justice happening in your space as well. That's just my personal view, Michelle. I don't know if that helps at all. Thank you. I can see your thumbs up on that. Thank you. Would anybody else like to come in with anything else before we wrap up today's conversation? We've got Byron, we've got Hubert. Gents, please be as short and sweet as you can. Thank you very much indeed. Byron.
Okay. The attitude in Ireland, I just put the film up there, The Guarantee. The attitude in Ireland is too big to fail. And that's really the attitude of the banks here. Quick story, yeah. I wrote to the taxman on 12 occasions, effectively telling them what the deal between GE and Pepper was going on, and the fact that Pepper didn't have any mortgages. 12 attempts. In the end, they took me serious, and they said, okay, fine, we're looking into it. We cannot communicate back with you once the investigation starts. But here's the thing. Every time I wrote to the taxman at every different department, I CC'd the directors of Pepper. The culmination of that was the taxman took 129 million from Pepper. Do you see what I'm saying? They're too big to fail. Rather than come and see Byron Jenkins and here's a check, go off into the sunset, too big to fail, didn't give a rat's. But it cost me 129. Well, I cost me 129 million. And I'll leave you on that one.
Jeez, thank you very much indeed, Byron. Our last speaker is going to be Hubert. As short as you can, Hubert, so we can wrap up for tonight. It's been a great conversation, Hubert. What would you like to say? And please do take yourself off mute so we can hear you. Thank you. We can't hear you, Hubert, because you're still on mute. Whilst Hubert's unmuting, I just thank everybody for being here tonight. Thank you. Over to you, Hubert. Thank you.
Just a quick thought for the group. The collusion between banks, solicitors, legal firms, accountants, and so on. Has that been given any thought by the folk who have been shafted by the banks?
Yeah. Without a doubt, that interconnection of all the enablers is definitely there to be seen. Valuers, estate agents, accountants, lawyers, bankers. It's all most definitely interconnected, Hubert, and that's a big part of the problem. That's why we can't simply isolate one small part of the problem and fix it that way. We need some kind of a whole system solution to it. Folks, we'll bring our conversation to a close there. Thank you all very, very much indeed. I really do hope you found it interesting listening to Terry. It's great that we've got his involvement, his support, his interest. I think there's huge potential in the idea that Mark Bannister spoke about earlier, the pledge for Irish citizens. We'll work that up into something decent and we'll get it ready for the march. And thank you all very much indeed. On that note, we'll say good night. Thank you all. And we'll crack on from there. Thank you all very much indeed. Cheerio. See you next time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.